Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Thriving Adoptees podcast. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Jaime Weatherholt. Welcome to the show, Jaime. Looking forward to our conversation today.
Yes, thank you so much for having me, Simon. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I love these conversations. Like the best part of my day. We were talking last month, I think. Yeah, we're talking July. We're doing this August.
Yeah.
We're talking, and one of the things that fascinates me and a new angle that I'm looking to explore is this thing of what stops us thriving as adoptees. And if I look at my own stuff, right, I would say what stopped me thriving is resentment. And we talked towards the end of our conversation last time about forgiveness. So forgiveness seems like a good place to start. I see forgiveness and resentment as kind of opposites. Would you agree with that? Would you see other words?
Yeah, I think the feelings that people or I have experienced would be anger, which fuels your resentment towards whoever you deemed hurt you or caused you pain. And so our anger fuels that resentment because then we feel entitled to feeling this way. Like, oh, I'm allowed to be angry because you hurt me. Or I'm allowed to be angry because now that'll teach you a lesson.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so the anger runs for me too. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I love the way that you put it in that circular way, right? Anger. I've
Right.
never seen anger fueling resentment. So we're spinning into we're spinning a vicious circle here, not a virtuous circle. We're spinning a vicious circle where it's just gonna rev up. Yeah.
Right. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Because I think feelings are always what fuel the experience. So the experience is resentment, but the feeling that's fueling that is the anger or the rage. We could sprinkle in sadness if you want, but a lot of times it is that anger that's fueling this resentful experience that I'm having.
Yeah. Sorry, you said something. We could sprinkle in what?
Sadness,
Yeah.
because I think there's so many layers of feelings, and typically anger is a secondary emotion. So there's another feeling that's underneath anger. So a lot of times it is sadness or it's grief, sometimes fear. But usually what we are more familiar with and expressing or feeling is anger.
Yeah. Rage is a good one.
Yeah.
Like that as kind of anger times four.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
Rage is a pinnacle of the anger stuff. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Like you can feel it. Yeah. It's really deep.
Yeah. So how do you see that stopping us? Well, first off, how do you see that um, yourself or with your clients or both? However you how do you see that manifesting?
Um, well, so like in my experience, I mean, honestly, both myself and with clients, the the anger or the rage that adoptees can feel a lot of times comes with um like it either could come out in anger towards like maybe their birth parents, their biological parents, like they're angry that they don't have answers or that they don't have communication with them or they don't understand why they gave them up for adoption. So then they're just angry and bitter towards these people who didn't even raise them. And other times it could come out as just anger towards their adoptive parents or adoptive family, or even just people in general who are in their day-to-day lives, right? But a lot of times it seems to just affect those interpersonal relationships, you know, because that's typically what I always try to explain to clients is think about when you're angry and when you're fueling that resentment, when you're saying, I'm entitled to feeling this anger. So I'm just going to be bitter and, unpleasant. The only people who that ends up hurting is the people who are closest to you because you are unable to be the person who you truly are deep down inside. You're presenting yourself to your loved ones, to your family, to your best friends as this angry person when that's not actually who you are. And so, in actuality, well, maybe it's because you're mad at your birth family or you're mad at the fact that you're adopted. The people who are getting affected are the people who love you, the people who are like, hey, we're here for you. We want to spend time with you. We want to listen to you. And so it's turns into looking like you're angry at all of the people closest to you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I want to be completely clear here. Nobody is saying that this is a conscious choice.
No.
This is a trauma response. This is not a conscious choice, right?
Right.
So
Absolutely.
we're
Absolutely.
not at fault. It's not our fault. We are responding. You know, I was looking at something this week about a presentation that I'm doing, and I was looking at trauma responses, and I had four, and anger was the top one that came to me, right? Because that's how,
Yeah.
yeah. And somebody said, "Oh, I've my therapist has given me a list, and she's got 9." And I thought, okay, yeah, I'd like to have a look at those, but they were, yeah, one of them was annihilate, right, which I thought was, I had anger, anger. What did sorry, I had fight, anger leading to fight. I'd fight, fawn, I can't remember, fight, flight, and then
Mhm.
freeze. Yeah, and
Yeah.
I couldn't come up with anything for freeze, any emotion that went with freeze. And everybody else on the Facebook, they had loads of stuff for freeze, which I thought was an interesting one.
Yeah.
But yeah, anger feels the most because it's the hottest under.
Right. Well, and you're absolutely right. I like that you remind listeners of that it's not a conscious decision that I'm saying, oh, I'm going to be mean to you because I'm resentful. It it comes off as so ingrained in the adoptee, in the person who's experiencing this anger, because I mean, a lot we know in research with what happens in children, meaning like how our interactions are as children from our parents, we will internalize however they make us feel because children don't have the cognitive ability, meaning like the front part of their brain isn't developed enough to understand this isn't about me. And so imagine like as whether a baby or a child, whatever age, if you are losing your family, you're losing your parents, you don't have the cognitive ability to understand why this is happening. So it turns into an internalized belief, whatever the individual decides to make that be. And so that internalized belief is how you see yourself in the world. So that internalized belief could be something like, I'm not lovable, I'm not good enough, something's wrong with me, I'm a bad person, I'm a bad kid. And so that is what fuels this belief, is what fuels this feeling. Like, well, I'm just angry because everyone thinks I'm a bad person. Everyone thinks that I'm not lovable, you know? Any slight in how you treat me is going to fuel that belief that I think is true about myself, right? And so as adoptees grow up, it turns into just behaviors at that point, because they're no longer thinking to themselves, I'm not lovable, I'm not good enough. They're just angry. And this feeling keeps coming back, this feeling of emptiness, this feeling of anger or sadness. Does that make sense?
I think so. So if we're saying there's this vacuum, so there's a vacuum because there's no cognition, whatever. There's no concepts. There's no
Like
concept.
critical thinking ability. Yeah.
Okay. There's none of that. There is a feeling in a vacuum, and then our meaning making mind is trying to come up with plausible answers,
Right.
and that becomes internalized belief. Is that it, or am I overcooking it?
Yeah, absolutely. So here are some examples, right? Like I have a handful of clients in which this, like, it's kind of the same script, different person. So in both experiences, they were adopted as babies, whether at birth or several months after birth, right? And so in session, as they're, older and in front of me, teenager or adult, they will just be like, I am just sad all of the time. And it's annoying when people try to tell me that, oh, it's okay. Or when the people who are closest to them are being supportive and like trying to be there for them, right? And they're like, I'm still angry at them and I don't like what they're saying. And it's just very frustrating. And so the belief when we dig in session for these individuals would be things like, I'm just not deserving of love. I'm not lovable. And so in session, I'll have them even visualize or like pretend, quote unquote, like pretend to remember when you were a baby, you know, right at the moment when your birth parents were gone, right? And you realize I'm all by myself, right? And I'm like, just visualize that. Picture a baby in your mind's eye. And as they picture that baby, they, in these people's examples, they feel really sad for that child because they know how that child feels. They're like, that child's sad. That child's also confused. They're wanting to know where their parents are. It's a baby. So obviously, like, it doesn't understand what's going on. And with these clients, I'll say, now, those feelings, you and that baby have the same feelings and the same heart. So you both know that exact feeling of confusion, of shock, of not knowing where you belong in this world. And so I'll try to get them to say, could you imagine, like, as a grown up, walking into that room and picking up that little version of you, that little baby of you, and and telling them whatever it is that they need to know that they weren't told, to help negate those negative beliefs. And so for some of my clients, like it's a really emotional experience because it's the first time in which they get to tell their little one, their little version of themselves, that all of these beliefs you've thought about yourself, like you aren't good enough, you aren't lovable. I'm like, would you say that to a baby? Would you tell that to that little girl or that little boy? Well, of course not, right? And so that helps kind of peel off that, remember anger, that secondary emotion, peel off that anger and get to the sadness that they're actually feeling or the loneliness that they're actually feeling. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, and this is, I've said this before on the podcast, but not recently, and I'm going to. It's a massive gender stereotype, right? And it's to do with, yeah. So, but it was told to me by a woman, so I kind of, somehow that makes it's okay for me to say that because I'm not being a male. I'm not being a misogynist. I'm actually repeating what a woman said to me. Does that make
Yeah,
So
I'm following.
she said uh, women cry and men fight. So that
Mhm.
the sadness that makes
Oh yeah.
sense as anger as a secondary emotion, peeling off the anger to reveal the sadness that's
Yes.
beneath, and that's kind of quite. I I'm one of those. I did some of that. What's his name? NLP years ago, neuro linguistic.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm in the touchy feely one, whatever that is. Kinesthetic, yeah. I'm quite high in the kinesthetic. So that just when I said that to me myself, right, anger, peeling back the anger to the sadness, it's kind of landed for me, and I'm getting goosebumps about it. So
Yeah. Yeah.
that's been I've never. It clearly was an important lesson for me when I heard that from my mentor. But you've just brought it you've given it even more depth. I think I used to think that learning and understanding was a yes or a no,
Right.
and it's not. Understanding
It's like a depth. You
a
go
depth.
deeper and
Yeah,
deeper.
it, understanding has got depth. Got depth,
Yes.
and the deeper we go, the more profound the learning. Yeah,
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. That's the way I see it too. Is it's not like you just know. It's you're gonna go deeper and deeper into what you already know.
yeah.
Yeah, like learning all of the sides to it.
So I heard something this afternoon. I was listening to a podcast, and somebody said, "I get it in my marrow." Do you know what I mean?
That deep.
Yeah. So so people say, you can get it. I often say, right, you can get it in your head, or you could get it in your heart,
Uh-huh.
or you can get it in your bones.
Right.
Well, inside the bones is the marrow, right? So yeah,
Right.
my pronunciation of the word marrow might be a bit off, but I don't. So bone marrow. So it's a level. It's even more than our bones,
Oh yeah. Going deep with it. Yeah.
which is why this podcast is a little bit different to most adoptee podcasts, because we go deeper usually.
Oh sure.
We've had enough of just the story stuff. We
Right. Just swapping stories. We need more than that.
we need more than that. Um, and the reason that we need more than that is because we are not our stories.
Right. Well, and we can swap stories all day long, but we need to dig deeper and learn from them, take something from it. So we're not, you're right, just our story, because we're not, we're much more than that.
So I've slightly different take on this. No, let me ask you a better question, actually, because I was going to go into my stuff. So, what lies do you see in your clients, or what lies have you uncovered in your own story, like the story in your head about who you are, right? That story.
Right.
On what lies do you hear from adoptees about them being wrong about who they are?
Oh yeah. Um, so the lies that I've told myself that I used to believe, it would always go back to I'm not lovable. Like no one cares about me. I'm not good enough. And going back again to your point of how subconscious these beliefs are, that those beliefs, they still come up like present day. Like, yeah, I've quote unquote cleaned it up and I'm doing the work consciously, but I get into an argument with my husband and I feel like he doesn't love me. I go to that belief still. I'll still be like, ah, he just doesn't understand. He doesn't care about me. He doesn't love me. And it's not like I'm consciously thinking that, but that feeling, like imagine truly feeling and believing that about someone who you love doesn't love you, and that feeling of like loss and sadness, that reflex will still come up within me. And so I still will have to consciously be aware of that feeling and notice, I think what we were talking about, this is how I integrate the mindfulness part into it, is where I have to be in the present of what is actually happening, and using that visualization that I said earlier with that little one. I need to pick up that little one, that little baby version of me who does feel like she's not good enough, right? Something is wrong with her and she isn't lovable. I need to tell her, no, you're okay, you're safe, right? Like you are a grown up, and grown up has people around her that does love her. You are loved, you are special. And so bringing that back into those little knee-jerk reactions of when those internalized beliefs come up, it's like a conscious dance that has to be had. But once you really dissect and know what it is about you, when you really understand that feeling and when it gets triggered, or when the wheels start turning and you start saying those terrible things to yourself again, you have to start that moment of, okay, what do I need to do? How do I need to calm myself down? How can I look around me and see what is actually happening versus what is my knee-jerk reaction to what I think is happening?
Okay.
Does that make sense?
It does. And if I can circle back, are we saying that the understanding of our own lovability has infinite depth?
I would
Somehow,
say so.
somehow I like that. Like, so we can't get that at a there's no end to the depth of
Right.
understanding that. Because like I was gonna ask you, does your, when you say he doesn't love me, is that as far as it goes, or does it go further than that?
So if I do go to those thoughts, and again, it's sometimes not even conscious thoughts, it's just a feeling. That's what will fuel my anger and probably lead to my rage, right? And going back to what I was saying, where anger and resentment, how that actually ends up hurting the people closest to you, that's when I will get mean in an argument. Like I won't be arguing anymore. I'll just be bitter and just saying hurtful things or doing hurtful things, right? To the point where like we're not even arguing anymore. Like I'm just angry. I'm just an angry, bitter person. And so that's an example of how our anger ends up pushing people away, the people closest to us, rather than, us seeing the problem for the problem.
So the reason I asked the question about whether your stuff goes further than that is because I had a I made a silly mistake. What did I do? Yeah, I made a silly, trivial mistake around 2 cups of coffee, right? And I got a certain response from my wife. She called me a moron, and there was this withering look, and I felt a bit weird. But then 5 days later, reflecting back on that conversation, my mind subconsciously had gone from, I felt a bit weird. I'd gone from, she's going to divorce me.
Yeah.
So
Oh yeah.
Stimulus, Simon does something stupid. Looney
Yeah.
Looney brain, Looney Tunes brain goes to,
Yeah.
she's gonna do.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah, I think anybody, it can definitely spiral into that, right? Because again, if you believe, if you believe she called you a name, then all of a sudden it triggered that internalized belief, and then you're just kind of sitting in that feeling that that belief brings to you, right? And again, it's a rainbow of feelings as we described. It's could be anger, could be rage, you could be in your fight or flight, right? All of those things. And then days later, think about how all those feelings are turning the wheels of different thoughts, different cognitions. So your thought went to, well, she's going to leave me, right? Like it stair stepped its way up into this. Yep, there it is.
I wasn't aware of that.
Right.
That thought.
It's so subtle though. And that's what I like to really press for clients and listeners is it's so subtle, these little changes in our feelings and in our thoughts. But we think we're thinking rationally, like, oh, I can't handle this, like I shouldn't have to put up with this behavior, and we start to just feed into it. We justify why I'm supposed to feel this way or why I'm allowed to feel this way. And then look at where you landed. You landed over one argument a few days ago to she's going to leave me. And by argument, like it probably wasn't a
It
major
wasn't that.
argument. It
I
didn't equal the, like, it didn't match the stimulus, right? The thought level, the intensity of that didn't match the stimulus of the actual argument. But I know I do that too. Like I'll always go to a place of like, I can just be on my own. Like, I don't need this. I don't need you. To like my husband, to anyone, I'll be like, I don't need you. Go away. So I'll push people away.
wow.
I think adoptees will either push people away or they will assume the other is going to leave them. It always goes back to an abandonment of some sort, right? Like the loved one in my life, I will leave them or they will leave me.
So thank you for the free therapy session.
Sure, that's what I do.
That's what you do. The thing that I'm kind of pleased about is that, well, now first off, I was going to say that my reaction is that I didn't fight back. So she called me a name. She called me Laura. But it was more the look that she gave me actually, rather than the name.
Mm-hmm.
And I just thought, I didn't fan the flames. I didn't go back at her. I froze actually. I froze in confusion. Right. I've just made some mistakes. I've made a mistake about 2 cups of coffee, and you're calling me a moron. This doesn't. These two things don't go like. I'm very confused. So I froze. I didn't pour any more. I didn't fan the flames with more anger. I didn't go back at it with more anger. I just withdrew. So I froze, and then it wasn't the subtle, as you say, very subtle stuff came back up. But and that's why I believe this lovability is a infinite.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, an infinite learning, an infinite. It's an experience.
The experience of being loved. Is that what you mean?
Being lovable.
Being lovable. Or even worthy of love. I get a lot of that from adoptees. Like they feel so deeply defective. I've had a couple of clients say, like, when I look at that little baby version of me, right? I think she must be a terrible, something is wrong with her. Like she must be evil. Or something is wrong with him. Like can't do anything. So it goes back to this feeling of like, I'm defective, I'm not good enough. Like something is inherently wrong with me. So it revolves around that lovable feeling too. But sometimes the verbiage that my clients say are those statements, you know.
So I I don't know. I've heard this is something ringing back in the back of my brain. I don't know where it is, but with your skills, I'm sure it'll be just like a walk in the park for you. So I think I heard it something. So we can externalize it, or we can internalize it.
Right.
And I think this is where I'm going. Right. So I had this feeling. These words came from nowhere when I was 40. My birth mother, she didn't love me enough to keep me. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So that's externalizing it. And then you've got the other way of doing it, which is what you just said.
Like, I'm not lovable.
I'm not lovable. Yeah.
I'm defective.
Can you, can you put a bit more flesh on around that, Bones? Or if I'm going in the wrong direction, take us a better way. Yeah, there might be a better way of doing it. I don't know.
No, you're good. So are you asking, is there a reason why some people are more like internally going with their beliefs or externally going with their beliefs? Is that what you're saying?
No, I guess I'm saying maybe the anger goes with the externalizing it, because that's what I did, right?
Okay.
And the sadness goes with something wrong with me, right? So she didn't love me enough to keep me, right? So that's
I get it.
That's anger. I'm angry with her that she didn't love me. Or
Right.
internal sadness would be the internal what's wrong.
I get it.
What's
But
wrong with me was I was really I was I was she gave birth to me.
sure,
She didn't. No, I wasn't. She gave
I
birth.
wasn't good enough.
I
Yeah.
wasn't good. I wasn't good enough to be kept. Yeah, that's it. Right. She didn't
Okay.
love me enough to keep me, or is one way, and I'm not. I'm not good enough to be kept. So external.
Yeah. No, I get what you're saying now. Tell me this. And this is just in the way that I practice and what I believe, because at least in my experience, it makes the most sense and it fits. So for both of them, it's going back to our big umbrella topic of forgiveness. It's deciding, who does this forgiveness need to be directed towards, whether it's birth parent or me? Because sometimes forgiveness, like starting with others, right? So like you chose not to love me, right? You weren't good enough, right? When we're mad at like the birth parent for leaving me and like they couldn't handle it or whatever. So when we're fueling in our anger and in our resentment, remember, anger, there's still a feeling underneath that anger. Like, think about it objectively speaking. Imagine if, objectively speaking, a mother or father didn't want to raise their child. Like, they truly had no feeling towards that baby, towards their baby, right? That is like, that's sad. That's kind of a sad fact that is true. That doesn't mean that it's good or bad. I'm just saying that's a sad fact to know that that is what's happening. Because there are parents who do that, right? But we have to say, so imagine if this child or adult adoptee feels that that is what happened, right? Their parents didn't love them, didn't care about them. Like, that's just what they decided to do, right? And they're a bad parent because of that, quote unquote. Some parents are just like that. So then that adoptee needs to decide if, okay, so is it worth me carrying around this anger, this sadness? Because what I always try to get people to do is pretend to imagine you were the instigator of all of this anger. So pretend to imagine you were the birth parent. And let's come up with like every single hypothetical reason that birth parent relinquished you or gave you up for adoption, whatever, right? So easy examples of that in this example would be maybe they are just terrible people. They literally don't care about children. They have no empathy. They're like that few percent that just doesn't have empathy towards other humans, right? Maybe they were young and selfish and like didn't want to raise children, right? Maybe they're in just a situation where they couldn't have kids because of their lack of work or lack of income or lack of support. You know, I mean, try to imagine all the reasons that we've all heard why parents give their children up for adoption. Okay. All of those reasons, at least the ones that I've heard, none of them have to do with the adoptee. They all have to do with the situation in which the parents were. So because of that,
it's their stuff.
It's their stuff. So the adoptee has to decide, so why am I carrying around their stuff? Why am I carrying around their sadness, their inability to love, right? Because that's sad for them. So
but they haven't seen it that way.
Right.
The adoptee hasn't seen it that way until you point it out to them and they get it, right?
Right.
Not just you saying it, the message has to land for the adoptee, the client, right? So the client has to be,
and a lot of times it's because I like to visualize. I'm like, literally imagine you are talking to your birth parent and like say whatever you want to say. Get it out of your body and throw it back at them. Be like, I am mad. This is stupid that you did this, right? That is selfish of you. You are a terrible person. Like whatever it is that comes to mind, right? Whatever they happen to say. And then imagine like taking whatever that feeling is, you know, that deep rooted sadness or anger or rage, and like just throw it back at them, put it in their lap. And then when that feeling is gone, because you now know you have the cognitive ability to say, that isn't mine, I gave it back to them because when you think about it, being angry, a lot of times we think that this resentment we hold is teaching them a lesson, right? We think that, well, then someone has to pay. But I always use the analogy of that someone has to pay is the equivalent of like, you know, whenever you cook on a stove and if you accidentally like touch the pan and you burn yourself and you're like, oh God, that was hot. So then the next time you go and you prepare a dish, you're like, okay, I'm going to be a little careful because last time I burned myself, right? So that's what we do. We are smarter. We change our behaviors to prevent a burn. Now, this whole holding on to resentment because someone needs to pay, someone needs to suffer because bad things happened would be like every time I decide to cook, I purposefully put my hand on that stove to just remember, just in case I forget, you know, I don't want to not make the same mistake again. So I'm just going to go ahead and burn myself every time. But we don't need to keep suffering to say that we've learned a lesson. You know, we don't need to keep punishing ourselves when we know that I already know what happens.
So the job of the therapist or the therapist talking to the host of a podcast is to interrupt a pattern, is to so that the message lands for the listener. Stop grasping the handle of that hot pan without oven gloves.
Right. And then when you can truly imagine or even like saying out loud, or if you're a journaler, like write it down, whatever, but saying, I forgive you, birth parent, because, and so a lot of times it's what I hear people say, it's because now I realize it was never about me. I was, there was nothing
Yeah.
actually wrong with me, and you were the one, I was targeting the wrong person. My anger was targeting me, and it was hurting me. And so a lot of times people will also just say, I forgive you just because it has to be done so I can move forward, right? So I don't have to keep going through this.
So one of the first things that landed for me when I got my adoption file was I realized that the adoption plan was made before I was born. And what that meant for me is that she didn't look at me and say, I don't love this one enough.
Mm-hmm.
Because the plan had already been in place before she looked at me. And there was a weird kind of left brain logic there.
Right.
So that was one thing. And then a bit later in the file, there's the letter about the teddy bear. So the teddy bear had been a consolation prize, an effing consolation prize. Oh, and then 8 years later, when I get the adoption file, it's clear that the teddy bear is not an effing consolation prize. It's a symbol of her love, right? Now, I didn't go from anger to forgiveness.
Right.
I went from anger to connection. I went to anger, from anger to empathy. I actually went from anger to empathy. I think
Mm-hmm.
As the tears ran down my face, and I realized that the story in my head was totally wrong.
Mm-hmm.
She didn't love me enough to effing keep me was totally wrong.
Right.
But I hadn't seen that I had the insight that reading this letter brought it home for me how wrong my belief was. And that's
Mm-hmm.
why I want to talk about insights and learnings on this podcast, not stories, because I think stories keep us stuck.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not our stories anyway. So we're
Right.
definitely not the story in our head.
No, absolutely not.
So why do we want to keep? So what's benefited me is having my belief busted,
Right.
having my pattern changed
Right.
when my pattern has changed. But it was a spontaneous thing. It was a spontaneous thing. It was something that came up through experience, and then obviously what the therapist's job is to do is to, rather than it being spontaneous, you're doing these visualizations and this work to change the adoptee's narrative. How would you?
Right.
How would
Well,
you?
and I think this is also like for you got concrete evidence and proof, right? Just in piecing together parts of your puzzle. And so many adoptees I work with, that there's no option for that, right? And so same thing, we like to hold on to our anger and resentment because we think, well, I'm never going to know what's true. I'm never going to talk to them and find out why, or find out facts about what led up to their decision, all of that. And you can still forgive others, even if they don't apologize and acknowledge what they've done. And even if you don't know what happened, because when you understand that forgiveness is simply letting go of this anger and resentment, you know, some of it is piecing together like the why, again, like the hypothetical, why did birth parent relinquish me? What were all the things that led up to it? What were the reasons? You know, sometimes it's all we can do is imagine what the reasons were, but we have to recognize holding on to this anger isn't going to solve the problem.
Yeah.
When we realize that holding on to it is just hurting yourself and the people closest to you, it's really not worth holding on to this about somebody who's literally not in your life. You know, you're punishing somebody who's not even physically in your life, but
Well,
you're taking it out on all of the other people around you and yourself, right? Because you're the one who's suffering in that anger.
yes. So I heard something great on this subject, on resentment. It's something like, it's about a poison. Um,
Oh, how you drink the poison expecting the other person to die.
yes, yeah, yeah. So, we had I've done 3 interviews this afternoon. This is the third one, and the last one was a transracial, transnational adoptee from Korea, and she's been out to Korea. Every time it's a different. Instead of getting more information, she's getting less.
Yeah,
So she'll never know.
right.
So in that position, in that situation, she won't. She obviously she's not going to get all the facts. She's not going to get the whole jigsaw laid out for it. There's still going to be some pieces missing. So what you're saying is forgiveness, and a lack of anger is possible even in those circumstances.
Absolutely. That was, I mean, my story is similar to your last guest, same
Yeah.
exact thing, right? Because I'm from Korea, no records, no nothing, and did all the birth search, and there's really no options. And I've worked with other adoptees, these younger ones from like China, and there's just no documentation at all, right? With these closed adoptions and the international adoptions. But again, I was able to reach that level of forgiveness because when I realized how much this was hurting me and the people who I'm closest to, it was preventing me from having close relationships and fully loving myself and the people around me. Because it was like I was on guard, right? It was like I had this buffer up of rage. And really, when you understand why is it directed towards my birth family when they're not even here, like they are not even capable of feeling the wrath of my anger, but for some reason I'm now using that as like just punching bags to throw at other people. Like that doesn't make any sense. And so being able to say I need to forgive my birth mom because I I have to assume that, like, at least I am choosing to believe that she didn't do this to make my life hell and to tell me that I'm a terrible person, right? I'm choosing to believe that. And so because of that, of course I need to forgive her because I'm assuming she was doing the best that she could with what she had at that moment. Unless I hear otherwise, that, you know, and even if I don't want to believe that, the least I could do is forgive her because it has to be done. Because I don't want to keep living my life with this level of anger, right? With this internalized belief still just like flowing and fully believing it. I've reached a point where like when that internalized belief comes up, I can recognize it and say, okay, let's slow down. Like, let's figure out what the heck is actually happening because this doesn't make any sense. But in the past, I wouldn't. I would just ride that train and be like, all right, fine. This, you know, how can you have a sustaining relationship if you think nobody actually loves you? Does that make sense?
Yeah, you can't. I mean, the I was thinking about the bureaucrats as well. So Jen, who I interviewed last, an hour or so ago, she was. I was actually getting angry on her behalf about the bureaucrats actually, because I've got a hang up with bureaucrats, and it's like, what if I said that kind of let's say self-love has is an infinite self-love is infinite, okay. um and forgiveness, and you said some magic words, they're doing the best that they can, right? So um I kind of applied that I can apply that to bureaucrats, right? I'm gonna try and apply that to people in call centers. You know that call center. You ring a customer service line to change something about
Oh, call
utility.
center. Yeah.
Call centers, yeah. And like I go into, I kind of expect a fight with most of those people.
Right.
Not expect, not a fight. I expect that they're not going to solve my problems. I
Yeah.
expect them to,
Read a script. Yeah.
yeah, and I often find myself, I I I give them some. I ask them to ask their boss to change something, and to stop this happening in future. And I do it in a kind of like a slightly holier than thou way as I do it now.
Right.
And and then they ask me something like it's clear that it hasn't landed for them, and I just think you numpty, and I'm the one that ends up being frustrated. Sometimes I think it's easier to see this stuff with trivial stuff
Right.
than it is to see it with big stuff. Sometimes.
Right. Well, and I like this forgiveness concept though, because even in that example, I always tell clients, because what ends up happening is when clients start to fully understand this, they are much more compassionate towards others in general. So, like with those call center people, they're like, I used to just get so frustrated and angry, but now they are seeing the world through this lens of, you know what? This isn't about me. They're not treating me this way because of me. They're not treating me this way because something's wrong with me, or they think I'm stupid, or they think this about me. And so it's ends up being such an easier way of living in general. So it's cleaning up the adoptee like level of issues that we're focused on. But when you apply this to everything in life, having just ongoing forgiveness towards others and understanding everyone's just they're living their lives, but they're not doing it to you, right? They just are living their lives and they might be crossing paths with you, right? And that also goes into I did want to circle back to that other part where you were saying people when they have that belief of like I'm not good enough or like I'm not lovable, those internalized beliefs, the same concept is where you do the same thing, but you forgive yourself. You have to look at yourself, the adoptee, and say, I forgive myself for all of the mean things that I've said to myself, for all of the mean beliefs that I've fueled, for this anger that I've held up as this righteous shield, because now I see that the reason why I did this, talked to myself this way, treated myself this way, was because my younger self made these core beliefs. And it wasn't her fault. She was just trying the best that she could. So, really, when you can unify yourself with that younger version of yourself and forgive her because she was doing the best that she could, you know, then those internalized targets, those beliefs about yourself don't feel as real and valid anymore because you're no longer looking at yourself through the eyes of a hurt child. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. It's a lens, isn't it? It's the self-compassion piece, or grace. Is grace? Some people use that word internally and externally.
Yeah.
Can I go back to what asking you a question? So, was there? Do you remember them? Do you remember your kind of forgiveness moment? Do you remember that?
Yeah, well, for mine, and it's ongoing too, right? Like
Yeah.
we said, the depth, but like the start of it and where I learned a lot of this, I actually was trained in hypnotherapy. And so when I was going through the training, we had several scripts in which it was really digging down to like it would dig down to the internalized belief, and like it was multiple sessions, so like we'd dig down to whatever our internalized belief about ourselves was. um so that's what tells you like adoptee or non-adoptee, like this is kind of a blanket problem for every grown
Yeah.
up. And then doing forgiveness of others, and so being able to like literally talk to in hypnosis, like when you're in trance, talking to those that, who have hurt you, who were not good for you, and lending forgiveness towards them. And some of them, like, again, it's those examples of maybe they are just terrible people, or maybe they were just trying the best that they could. But either way, you can still forgive them, right? And then the last session is forgiving yourself and having a conversation with yourself, with any of your younger parts, like ages and stages of these internalized beliefs, and being able to that self-compassion, feel compassionate towards those younger ages and stages of, you know whether it was the age in which you were adopted, the age in which you did a birth search and like it failed, or, the age in which you found out something else about your birth parents or birth story. So all of these times in your timeline that you need to forgive. And so, I mean, doing all of those, because like one at a time, it wasn't like it was good, but it wasn't sustaining. But once I did all three of them, especially like the forgiveness of self, that was when I know, and from people who are closest to me know, that that's when I changed. Like I am much more compassionate towards myself, and when you're compassionate with yourself, you are with others. And so other people are like, yeah, you're
Ah,
calmer, you're not as easily triggered by things. I'm not quick to tell my husband like you're just doing this because you don't love me, because it's just not a belief
would
anymore.
you call him a moron if he made a coffee mistake?
If he deserved it.
Yeah. Well, isn't that true? Because it's that depth of that learning thing, right?
Right.
I say this quite a lot, that if especially when I'm talking to a adopted parent, right? I say it starts with us, right? It starts with us. It starts with us.
Right.
But I'd not realised that the compassion starts with self-compassion. I hadn't slotted compassion into that.
The self-compassion. Right.
I hadn't slotted that into the it starts with us.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
That's why I always start with making that connection to yourself with my clients, because if they don't believe that they are good enough or worthy or lovable or just if they are good, they don't believe that 100%, then it's difficult for me to convince them that their adoptive parents or their biological parents would believe any different either. Like, how am I supposed to convince them of that? Does that make sense?
It yeah, it makes perfect sense, and it's one of those Homer Simpson show. It's one of those. And I'm not even a fan of the show, but they, like,
you don't know unless you know, right? Like,
don't know unless you know.
yeah.
Wow. Feels like a good place to bring it in. What are we going to call this episode?
What would I call this? What?
Yeah. What would we call this? The name of this this episode of this interview of the podcast?
You either have to throw in something about forgiveness or something about self-compassion or both.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, both, I think.
Yeah.
Forgiving ourselves and others.
Yeah.
Cool. And as always, listeners, I would encourage you to check out the show notes with a link to what Jamie's up to and our website and socials and stuff like that. And yeah, brilliant. Love the conversation.
Thank you so much for having me. Yes, I appreciate it.
Good on you. Thanks, listeners. We'll speak to you again very soon. Take care. Bye.